17 years after the front door slammed in my face, an envelope marked, "The Morgan Family," landed in my mailbox. I didn't notice it at first. It was wedged between a utility bill and a coupon booklet I'd never read. The gold lettering gleamed even through the thin plastic of the storm-dampened mail slot. My fingers hesitated. For a second I thought I was hallucinating. The Morgan family. Not Claire Morgan. Not even Miss Morgan. Just the family. The autumn rain was tapping on the roof like it always did, cold, persistent, rhythmic. There was something about October storms that felt personal in this town. That night, 17 years ago, the wind had howled the same way as I stood outside with nothing but a duffel bag and a fevered mind. Now the wind was here again. And this letter, this envelope, with its carefully printed script and wax seal, felt like the storm coming to knock a second time. I took it inside and laid it on the kitchen counter. My little kitchen smelled like stale coffee and lemon soap. The light was soft, indirect, with gray clouds bleeding into the morning sky. I stood for a long while staring at the envelope. I hadn't seen handwriting like this in years. Not formal, not warm, institutional. Eventually I opened it. Inside was a folded card with embossed edges and a single line centered in gold foil. "You are cordially invited to the wedding of Liam Morgan and Grace Monroe." October 28, 2023, Rockport, Maine. There was no salutation, no "Dear Claire." No, it would mean the world. No apologies, just names, just facts, just dates. My brother Liam. The last time I saw him, his voice cracked when he asked me not to come to Mom's funeral. Said it would make things harder for everyone. That was 11 years ago. Now he was getting married. And somehow, somewhere, someone decided that sending an invitation was the appropriate move. Maybe he didn't even know. Maybe it was Grace's idea. Or worse, my father's. My thumb ran across the embossed letters again and again, like trying to read Braille with a hand that had forgotten how to feel. And then came the text. A sharp buzz on the counter. Unknown number. No name. Don't come. Don't embarrass him. 3 words. Then a period. But I recognized the number. One of Dad's old numbers. He used to keep burner phones, he called them, because he hated carrying a tracking device. This was one of them. Still burned into my memory from the time he used it to text me updates about Mom's final days, but not her actual passing. He didn't even sign it. He never needed to. His voice lived inside that tone. Cold, clipped, performative concern masking control. I stared at the text until the letters blurred. My fingers hovered over the reply field, then retreated. What could I possibly say? That I was still here. That I mattered. I folded the invitation back into its envelope, set it on the table, and went to the drawer under the sink. Pulled out an old tin of Strike Anywhere, matches the ones I kept in case the power went out during a storm. The irony wasn't lost on me. I lit one. The flame touched the corner of the envelope and flared to life with a hiss. I held it over the kitchen sink, watched it curl and blacken, the edges crumbling like ash wings. I let it burn all the way down until the card twisted in on itself and died in a silent puff. Then I reached into the drawer beside it, one I hadn't opened in years, and pulled out a small square of cloth. Stiff, salt-stained, faded from time and blood. A bandage I'd once pressed against a man's temple in the middle of a helicopter ride through a hurricane. He had lived, and that little square had stayed with me ever since. A reminder that I could save someone when no one had saved me. I didn't know why I kept it. Maybe because no one had ever thanked me. Maybe because I never got the official medal. Maybe because it was the only thing I'd done that no one could take from me. I tucked the bandage into my coat pocket. Not out of nostalgia, out of defiance. My eyes drifted toward the hallway, toward the wall where my old framed photos hung. Not many visitors came to this apartment, and even fewer asked questions, but I still kept them there. The red flight suit, the rotor blade against a midnight sky, a boy holding my hand with tears streaming down his cheeks. Proof. I walked toward the largest frame, the one in the center, and shifted it aside. Dust had collected behind it. A thin breath of time. Behind the glass taped to the wall where no one could see was a single folded sheet. I peeled it away with trembling fingers, opened it, read the top line again even though I already knew every word. Nominee Medal of Distinguished Service, Claire Morgan. The ink had faded, but not enough to erase the insult. Nominated, not awarded. Filed, not announced. The ceremony canceled. Paperwork misplaced. No follow-up. No phone call. Only silence. Behind a framed photo of her helicopter mission, she finds an old certificate, Nominee Medal of Distinguished Service. Claire Morgan. The night my father threw me out, the rain soaked into my bones, and I've carried it ever since. It wasn't just the kind of rain that pattered on windows. It wasn't gentle. It was the kind that slashed sideways, soaked through coats, rattled rooftops, and made gutters scream. The kind of storm that changed the way you remembered a house. I was 18 and standing in the Morgan kitchen, clutching an envelope with trembling fingers. My hair was wet not from the rain, but from the shower I took trying to calm myself before delivering the news. There were 3 seats at the table. Only 2 were occupied. Edward sat straight-backed at the head, scanning paperwork with surgical precision. Mom sat to his left, her hands folded in her lap, like a churchgoer waiting for confession. She had grown thinner that fall, pale even under the fluorescent light. I placed my acceptance letter on the table. The logo at the top was bold, Northeast Air Medical Training Center, and my name just beneath it. The words blurred as I looked down, heart hammering. He didn't glance at it. Instead, he slid a thick manila envelope across the table toward me. It contained pre-filled law school applications. 5 of them. I swallowed. Dad, I'm not applying to law school. You're not going into helicopters, he said flatly. Not even blinking. You think you're flying to save people, but you'll just be a glorified sky taxi. It's trauma response, I shot back, fists clenched. Medivac. Search and rescue. Life-saving. He leaned back slowly. This house doesn't raise sky taxi drivers. And there it was. That sentence. That insult he never retracted. It landed harder than the thunder shaking the windows. Mom opened her mouth, then closed it again. Her voice had grown softer over the years, but I still remember what she had whispered to me once, after I aced a science fair and Edward dismissed it as cute. She had leaned in close, almost conspiratorial. He'll never let you fly. But I flew anyway. Not with his permission. Never with that. I already accepted, I said, placing the letter squarely in front of him. He picked it up with 2 fingers as if it might stain him. His eyes scanned the words and a corner of his mouth twitched. Then he crumpled it into a loose ball and tossed it into the sink behind him. That's when I stood. You don't get to decide who I become. The room pulsed with silence. He rose. You've made your choice, Claire, he said, voice low. And choices have consequences. I looked to my mother. She shook her head, barely perceptible, and whispered something under her breath. I couldn't hear it. Then the thunder cracked again, and he pointed to the door. You want to fly, fly now. I froze. Are you serious? He didn't blink. I'll give you 5 minutes to get your things. After that, I lock the door. I stared at him, heart thudding so hard I thought it might bruise my ribs. He turned away, already done with me. Already erased me. Mom stood and grabbed his arm. Edward, please, don't do this. He shook her off. Liam appeared at the top of the stairs. He was 10, in pajamas, holding a stuffed rabbit by one limp ear. His eyes were wide, searching my face for clues. I opened my mouth to say goodbye, but the lump in my throat strangled it. I turned toward the coat rack and pulled on my windbreaker. Grabbed my duffel bag, already half-packed with brochures and textbooks I'd been hiding under my bed. The zipper screeched in the quiet. Then I walked to the door, turned the knob, and opened it to the storm. The wind nearly knocked me off balance. Cold rain lashed my face, but I didn't hesitate. Not even as my mother called after me softly, a choked whisper, "Claire." And not even as Liam took one tentative step down the stairs before Edward barked his name. The door slammed shut behind me, my first true exile. The porch light didn't stay on long. I walked into the storm. No destination, no umbrella. Just my heartbeat and the sound of a family turning into a wound. Years later, I would learn that my mother left something behind for me. Something I never knew existed until last week when a package arrived from a lawyer in Rockport. Sealed in a plain brown envelope postmarked with a return address from a firm I didn't recognize. It was the kind of envelope that made your hands tremble before you even opened it. Inside was a letter. Yellowed. Faded ink. Her handwriting. There were only a few lines. Half of it smudged. No date. But at the bottom, a sentence that still burned behind my eyes. Hope is the last thing to fly away. For 17 years, no one in this town said my name. Now it's printed in gold ink, impossible to erase. The taxi smelled faintly of pine air freshener and salt from the ocean. My duffel bag was slumped beside me, the strap soaked from where it had brushed the edge of a puddle at the curb. The car moved steadily through winding roads bordered by trees, half on fire, leaves the color of rust and blood and saffron. Autumn here had always been dramatic. Like everything else in Rockport. We were still about 40 minutes out. Far enough that I could tell myself it wasn't too late to turn around. I could ask the driver to head back, claim I forgot something important, or say I changed my mind. I could even pretend I never got the invitation. If I disappeared, they wouldn't follow. But the idea sat wrong. Not heavy, just wrong. The man behind the wheel looked to be in his 60s. Weathered face, beard, mostly gray hands strong on the steering wheel. There was something about the way he drove that made me think he'd been doing this a long time, probably before GPS. Every turn was muscle memory. We'd been silent since the highway. Then he spoke. "You were a pilot, weren't you?" My spine straightened slightly. "Still am." He nodded, eyes never leaving the road. "Figured. You flew into the flood last year, didn't you? That mess down in Kennebunkport. House halfway underwater, couple stuck in the attic." I blinked. "Yeah, that was me." "Knew it," he said, tapping the steering wheel twice like a quiet drumbeat. "I drove one of the paramedics that day." Said the evac bird came in sideways through the wind, like it had something to prove. Couldn't stop talking about the woman behind the stick. I let the silence sit a moment before answering. "Glad they made it out." He looked at me in the mirror, a flicker of recognition warming his eyes. "They did." Said the pilot was a ghost, came and went before anyone could say thank you. I didn't say anything to that. My hands were in my lap, clenched too tight. After a few seconds, he added, "Don't get many people like you around here." I gave a small smile. Not forced. Just cautious. The kind that slips out before you remember to block it. It had been so long since someone recognized me for something I wasn't ashamed of. Strangers remembered. Family forgot. Or pretended to. The leaves outside the window blurred past like slow-motion fire. Every twist of the road seemed to tighten something in my chest. I knew this route too well. I had taken it twice before, once for Mom's funeral, which I never made it inside for, and once in secret to visit her grave. Each time the air got thicker the closer I came. I wasn't wearing anything special. Just jeans, boots, and a charcoal coat with a broken zipper. I hadn't dressed for confrontation, but my pulse had its own uniform tight around the ribs, sharp in the throat. We passed the edge of Rockport's town line, a wooden sign with peeling paint and the words, "Welcome home." I almost laughed. Then my phone buzzed. I hesitated before picking it up. The screen showed an unknown number again. No preview, just a little bubble of dread. I opened it. "If you shame him, don't expect mercy." 12 words. Same clipped tone. No name. No punctuation except that final period, the full stop of a threat. My jaw clenched so tight it hurt. I didn't respond. I didn't even breathe. Just let the anger pool slowly in my chest, thick and familiar. I'd lived under that tone my whole life, on the edge of disapproval, walking tightrope strung across eggshells. The driver must have sensed something shift because he glanced at me in the mirror again but didn't ask. I stared at the message for a full minute. Then I tapped the trash can icon and watched it disappear. My reflection on the screen looked back at me, older than I remembered but not softer. I'll be there anyway. The Morgan house had new paint, new drapes, but none of my mother's scent remained. Even the doorknobs were colder. Brass polish to reflect the foyer light too perfectly, too impersonally, the kind of clean that erases memory. I stepped in without a word, heels quiet against the tiled floor, my breath catching slightly in the stillness. It smelled of cedar polish and some expensive candle, no trace of lavender and warm sugar, the blend my mother used to wear like armor. A staff member in gray passed by, eyes low. Another held the door a beat too long before vanishing. No one said welcome. No one offered to take my coat. To the right of the staircase stood a large frame in the main hall, one that used to hold a portrait of my mother in the garden, laughing, sun catching in her curls. It was gone. Now there hung a studio-lit portrait of Edward Morgan. Hands folded, chin up, suit crisp. Alone. I didn't need to read the plaque underneath to know it was a recent addition. It reeked of legacy curation. My throat tightened. From the hallway came a voice, clipped and unmistakable. "Didn't think you'd actually show." He stepped into view slowly, as if time itself bent to let him arrive with authority. Same measured stride, same storm-gray eyes. His hair had grayed around the temples, but nothing else about him looked soft. Edward Morgan wore disappointment like a tailored coat, and mine still fit him well. I took a breath. I came for Liam. And for Mother. He didn't flinch. Just looked me over as if I were a bill to be calculated or a liability to be managed. Then, with a slow nod, he stepped aside, not to welcome me in, but to let me pass without touching his space. The silence, like always, was his preferred language. I moved past him without blinking, heading toward the staircase. A chill pulsed beneath my skin, equal parts cold air and rising memory. Halfway up, I heard another voice, lighter, unsure. "Claire." I turned. Liam stood at the base of the stairs, one hand behind his neck, the other twitching by his side. He looked taller, narrower. His shoulders pulled in like he still wasn't sure he was allowed to take up space. "Hey," I said. His eyes flicked toward Edward, then back to me. "I didn't know if you'd make it." I did. He opened his mouth again, but whatever words followed got lost. He took one step up, then paused. His glance darted behind me. I followed it instinctively. And there she was. Grace. She stood just beyond the entry to the parlor, dress like ivory shadow hair swept in a low twist. She looked too serene for this house. Her eyes met mine without flinching. No introduction, no words. Just a silent walk forward. Then softly she reached out and took my hand just for a second. Warm, firm, a squeeze, then release. I had no idea what to make of her, but in that instant I didn't need to. The air shifted. Dinner was a blur of cold silverware, formal conversation, and veiled glances. I barely touched my food. Edward barely looked my way. Liam tried once to mention something about aviation news, but Edward interrupted with a tangent on estate taxes. When it ended, I climbed the staircase alone. That was when I saw it. My mother's portrait, once the soul of this house, had been moved. Not destroyed, not hidden, just relocated to a shadowy corner of the staircase landing. A place where no guest would stop to admire it. Her smile now bathed in shadow, the gold frame dulled with dust. Replaced. It hit harder than expected. I didn't cry. not then. Just stared at it until the corners of the canvas blurred. Soft footsteps approached. Grace again. She didn't speak. Didn't break the silence. Just reached into her clutch, and with a glance that asked nothing and promised everything slipped a small brass key into my hand. Her room is still locked. Try tonight. Beneath the dresser in my mother's room sat a wooden box. Its lock rusted, its secrets intact. The room hadn't changed in 17 years. The bed was still neatly made, tucked the way she always liked it, with hospital corners so tight you could bounce a coin off them. Dust lay in delicate veils across the vanity and mirror, a kind of gray mourning that no one had bothered to clean. Even the scent, the faintest ghost of lavender and aged cedar, still lingered like something too stubborn to leave. I waited until the house fell quiet, until the last light in Edward's wing flicked off, and the ticking of the grandfather clock downstairs counted past midnight. Then I padded barefoot across the thick carpet, key in hand, pulse steady and defiant. The lock groaned when I turned it, brittle from time. It gave, with a small snap. Inside, the hinges creaked open like a breath long held and finally released. The box was lined with blue velvet, faded and thin in places. I stared at the contents, unsure which to touch first. A letter lay on top, folded carefully, yellowed at the edges, sealed with wax. My name, written in my mother's script. I sat on the bed and opened it, fingers shaking despite the stillness in my chest. Claire, if you are reading this, then somehow you've come back to the place that silenced us both. There are things I never said, not because I didn't want to, but because I knew he wouldn't let them reach you. You were never a disappointment. You were my miracle with wings. When he pushed you out, part of me broke that I never managed to fix. But I watched the sky every day you were gone. Every single day. Even the gray ones. If he reads this before you do, he'll destroy it. That's why I hid it where he wouldn't look again, beneath his own ego. Be more stubborn than the storm, Claire. It's the only way we survive. Love you always, Mom. The words blurred as I read them. Not from grief. No, this was something angrier. Sadness with clenched fists. Underneath the letter sat a thin folder. I opened it and found something I hadn't known existed. An official document. Signed, sealed, never delivered. Nomination Medal of Distinguished Service. Claire Morgan. Issued by the National Air Rescue Coalition. Dated April 14, 2019. Marked confidential, direct family notification required. I sat there staring at the embossed seal. I remembered that spring. I'd flown 3 missions in 4 days, 2 of them under extreme weather. One had made the news. I never expected a medal, but I'd heard whispers about a nomination. Then silence. The kind of silence that makes you think maybe you imagined it. Apparently, Edward didn't just ignore it. He hid it. Behind me, a faint knock. Then the door opened without a word. Grace stepped in carrying a small tray with 2 mugs of tea. She wore a knit cardigan over her dress, her hair now loose, softening her in a way that made her seem younger and older at the same time. She paused when she saw the box open, then sat beside me. Did you find what you were looking for? I handed her the nomination letter. Her eyes scanned it slowly. Then she looked up. Did you ever receive this? I shook my head once. No. He kept it. Something shifted in her. Not surprise, more like recognition. She placed the cup on the bedside table and reached over, gently folding the letter and tucking it back inside the folder. Her movements were deliberate, reverent, as though sealing the truth. You saved me once, she said quietly. Now let me save you. I turned toward her. I don't understand. She met my eyes. Tomorrow I'll tell them everything. I couldn't speak. The room felt different now, less haunted somehow. Not cleansed, but braced for something. I closed the box, slowly pressing the lid until the latch clicked into place. My hand trembled as it settled on top. not from fear but from the knowledge that the storm isn't over yet. If praise can build a life, a single cruel laugh can slice 17 years of it apart. Harborview glittered with too many chandeliers for a coastal restaurant, the kind of place you reserve when appearances matter more than intimacy. We sat at a long table stretched across the windows, candlelight flickering against the glass, the ocean dark and impatient just beyond. I wore navy, sleek, quiet, a color that faded into the background until someone forced a spotlight on it. Edward sat at the head, of course, Liam beside him, Grace opposite. I'd been placed 5 seats down mid-table, flanked by acquaintances who remembered me vaguely, but didn't know where to look when conversation stalled. I hadn't touched my wine. Yet. Grace's voice played in my mind like a steady violin. Tomorrow I'll tell them. But Edward had always owned the stage, owned the room, owned the silence. The first toast came from Liam, awkward hopeful. The second from Grace's mother, who complimented the Morgan family's prestige with the forced enthusiasm of someone trying to blend 2 oil paintings. Then Edward stood. He didn't need a microphone. His voice carried the same way it always had, smooth, commanding, shaped by years of boardrooms and private schools and reputation management. I've always said he began lifting his glass that the measure of a person is not how high they fly, but how long they stay grounded. A few polite chuckles, a ripple of glass against glass. Some people, he continued, smiling just wide enough to show he wasn't joking, spend their lives flying in circles, mistaking noise for purpose. Silence. It was surgical, precise. Eyes shifted toward me like marbles rolling across a tilted floor, some wide with surprise, others narrowed with curiosity. A few blinked with sympathy they didn't know where to place. I sipped my wine, slow and deliberate, let it coat the back of my tongue like armor. I didn't blink, didn't flinch. I refused to feed him the expression he wanted. My silence tonight would be sharper than his applause. Grace didn't move. Her gaze remained downcast, hands folded gently in her lap. But her heel tapped once beneath the table, a private metronome of coming war. Dessert arrived untouched. The chatter resumed brittle and awkward. Then came the sound that cut through it all. A single voice, older, feminine, brittle, with disbelief. She saved my husband's life last winter. The room stilled again. The voice belonged to a woman seated near the end of the table. Pale blue dress pearls that caught the candlelight like tiny flares. Her hands trembled as she set down her fork. He crashed on I-95 during that ice storm, she continued, looking straight at me now. You flew in, landed on the overpass. Everyone said it couldn't be done. A second voice followed. My cousin, same thing. You pulled him from a hiking trail. The rescue crew said no one else would have risked it. A third. She's flown in and out of more disasters than most men ever have. I didn't recognize any of them. But suddenly they remembered me. Not as Edward's shame, but as something else entirely. Across the table, Edward's face tightened. He stood. His glass struck the table with a dull, sharp thud. She is no hero, he said, voice low but firm. She is a disgrace to this family. The words echoed like thunder in a vault. Chairs scraped. Forks froze. Someone coughed. I didn't move. Then Grace. She turned, met my eyes across the room. No words. Just one long look. A breath. A silent nod. Tomorrow. Sometimes the truth doesn't roar. It trembles through a microphone before the music begins. The lights shimmered above the wooden beams, casting golden halos across the crowd as they settled into hushed anticipation. The smell of sea air drifted in through the open doors, mingling with the warm scent of vanilla and champagne. Strings hummed softly in the background, warming up for the first dance. I stood near the back behind a column wrapped in fairy lights. I didn't want a spotlight tonight, not yet. But I knew the tide was shifting. It had been shifting since the moment Grace looked across the rehearsal dinner table and didn't blink. The floor beneath us creaked gently as the waves pressed against the boathouse stilts. Beneath the laughter and chatter was a tension, unspoken but rising. Not everyone had forgotten last night's toast, or the way Edward weaponized his voice in public. Liam stood near the head table, smiling nervously. Grace, radiant and poised, rested her hand lightly on his arm. He leaned in to whisper something, but she gently stepped away. She walked to the center of the floor and took the microphone before the band could begin. It squeaked slightly in her hand, then fell quiet as she raised it to her lips. The room fell still. "I know this is the part where we're supposed to have our first dance," she began, her voice calm, clear. "And we will. But before that, I need to share something." I saw Edward shift in his chair. His fingers curled slightly against the white linen napkin in his lap. "When I was 16, Grace continued, I nearly died." The room exhaled in surprise. Wine glasses paused mid-air. A few guests glanced at each other, confused. "I was hiking with friends near the North Cove cliffs. I slipped, fell, hit a ledge and couldn't climb out. I was alone for hours." Her voice didn't crack. Not once. But there was a thrum beneath it, steady, unflinching. They called in a rescue helicopter. A woman rappelled down in the rain, barely any visibility. She found me bleeding and terrified. She pressed her forehead to mine and told me to breathe. A few murmurs rippled across the room. "That woman," Grace said, turning toward me, "is my sister-in-law tonight." All eyes followed hers. I didn't move. Didn't need to. "She doesn't wear medals, though she's earned them. She doesn't ask for thanks, though she's owed them. She flies into storms while others flee." Someone near the bandstand gasped. Another whispered, "That's her, the cliff rescue woman." Grace smiled gently. "Because of her," she said, voice lifting, "we founded the Sky and Shore Fund. Because of her, I lived. And because of her, I know what courage looks like." There was no pause. The applause erupted like a wave. Not polite, not tentative, real. It spread through the crowd, rising with clarity, echoing off the wood beams and glass. Some people stood. Others wiped their eyes. A few looked ashamed that they hadn't known, or hadn't cared to ask. I stood still as it happened. Not out of pride, out of disbelief. For 17 years, silence had filled every room I entered with my family name. Tonight that silence fractured. I looked at Edward. He was already watching me. His jaw-clenched, lips drawn into a brittle line. The blood had drained from his face, and with it his grip on the room. The control he'd curated like a portrait on a wall, it was slipping through his hands. A crowd can cheer your name, but one man's silence can feel heavier than thunder. They were still clapping when the tension finally shifted from awe to unease. Applause faded, replaced by sidelong glances, hushed conversations, and a growing awareness that something irreversible had been set in motion. The wedding hall had turned into a stage, and whether Edward liked it or not, he was no longer directing the scene. "I remember her now," an elderly man said from a nearby table. "She landed at the harbor during the ice storm. I was there. She didn't wait for permission. She helped my sister out of a capsized ferry," another added. "They said it was too dangerous, but she went in anyway." Voices layered, slow but steady, until the room buzzed with recollection. Not gossip testimony. Edward rose. "Enough," he said, sharp and clipped like the slam of a gavel. "This isn't about her." The room hushed, the air charged again. He adjusted the cuffs of his suit jacket with mechanical precision. "This is a family event, not a forum for old war stories." I stepped forward from the shadows near the edge of the dance floor. In my hands was a small object, polished plain, yet unmistakably out of place in a wedding. A white service glass, the kind used during commendation ceremonies, placed beside recipients who'd earned distinguished honors but were not present to claim them. "I agree," I said. "It is about family. Edward froze. He didn't look at the glass. He didn't need to. This was hidden in Mother's box, I said, my voice steady. You kept it from me. She kept it safe. I walked to the head table and placed the glass carefully beside his wine, and now I set it in the open. The silence cracked. Gasps rose around the room like wind catching the sails of truth. Heads turned. Eyes flicked from the glass to Edward to me, then back again. He stared at it. Stared at me. Said nothing. His face began to redden. First the cheeks, then his temples, a creeping flush that betrayed what he refused to voice. Grace stood slowly, resting a hand on my back. I didn't turn, but her presence felt like armor. Liam looked between us all, between his father, his bride, his sister, like a man watching a bridge burn and unsure which side he belonged to. Outside, wind howled against the windows. The storm had crept closer, louder, carrying the weight of timing that felt biblical. Edward cleared his throat. "This is manipulative," he said finally. "You think a glass changes anything?" I didn't reply. I didn't need to. The guests had eyes, ears, memory, and now proof. Someone at the back whispered, "What else did he hide?" Another, "Why would he keep that from her?" And then darkness. Total blinding breath, snatching darkness. The light snapped off with a sharp click. A second later, the sound of glass breaking somewhere in the distance. Then a high-pitched shriek. Panic flickered like lightning through the crowd. "Stay calm," someone yelled. Chairs scraped. Guests stumbled. Candles guttered in the sudden air shift, extinguished by the force of the front doors blowing open. Cold air slammed into the room. Grace gripped my wrist. "The power," she began. "I know," I said. "It's the storm." And somewhere deep in the dark, Edward's voice barked, "Get the backup lights." But I already knew this blackout wasn't random. It was the storm answering a 17-year silence. When the lights die, titles vanish. What remains is the beat of a failing heart. Someone screamed again, closer this time. The air was thick with the scent of extinguished candles and seawater blowing in through the open doors. Dozens of phones lit up like scattered stars, swaying in shaking hands, casting ghostly shadows on the wooden beams above. Grace stood beside me, steady but pale. Liam's voice cut through the noise, trying to calm the guests, but it was drowned out by the restless storm outside and the rising fear inside. And then I heard it, a heavy thud. A chair crashed back, then silence, followed by the sound of someone gasping. "Carl," someone shouted. I pushed through the crowd. He was on the floor near the main table, Carl Matheson, Edward's closest friend, the one who always sat too close to power and laughed too hard at Edward's jokes. His face was gray, his chest unmoving. A woman knelt beside him, fingers at his wrist. No pulse. The room dropped 10 degrees. No one moved. "I need an AED now," I barked. No hesitation in my voice. Not anymore. Liam turned and ran toward the emergency kit mounted by the exit. I dropped to my knees, checked his airway. Nothing. His eyes were open but unseeing. "Call 911, I said. "Turn on your phone flashlights and hold them above me." A ring of light formed, shaky but enough. The nurse beside me looked at me for instruction. "You start compressions," I said. 30 count. I'll prep the pads." As she pressed down on Carl's chest with trained rhythm, I tore open the AED case Liam brought back and ripped Carl's shirt down the middle. Beep. Pad connected. The machine spoke. Analyzing rhythm. "Do not touch the patient." Edward hovered nearby, blocking part of the light. "Move," I snapped. He didn't. I looked up, my voice lower but sharper than it had ever been. "Step back, or he dies." And he did. That was the moment it broke. Edward's authority, his barrier, his ability to pretend this wasn't happening or that he could still control it. The AED beeped again, shock advised. I pressed the button. Carl's chest jolted once hard. The nurse resumed compressions. I counted aloud. 1, 2, 3. Nothing. Again. The AED repeated its rhythm check. I wiped my forehead with my sleeve. It felt like the air had turned thick slow. My pulse pounded in my ears louder than the wind outside. We shocked him again. More compressions. Sweat dripped from my hairline. And then his body arched. A cough exploded from his chest. He gasped once, then again. The crowd, previously breathless, erupted into chaos. Cheers, sobs, the sound of someone dropping a wine glass. Carl blinked. Slowly. Confused. Grace dropped to her knees beside me, hand on my shoulder. You brought him back. I sat back, breathing hard. My hands shook not from adrenaline, but from the cold reality pressing in. I had done this before, so many times, in skies, in storms, but never in front of him. Edward was silent. He didn't offer a thank you, not even a nod. But he hadn't stepped in, hadn't stopped me. And for once, he hadn't owned the room. I walked to a side table and downed a full glass of water, my throat parched. Grace helped Carl sit up as others offered jackets and praise. I grabbed my phone to check the time. One new message, not from the spare line, the usual one, Edward's main number. I opened it. Meet me at the pier. Tomorrow. Some apologies are too heavy for words. Sometimes they come as a single text from the right phone. I stood at the edge of the pier as the gulls screamed their indifference into the fog. The wooden planks beneath my boots groaned with the rhythm of the tide, damp from the night storm, slick with the remnants of salt and memory. Dawn bled slowly into the sky, soft and hesitant. Like him. Edward was already there, facing the watercoat buttoned too neatly, hands clasped behind his back, like he was still holding on to something. I didn't call out. I simply walked until the echo of my steps made his shoulders shift slightly. He didn't turn. The silence wasn't cruel this time. It wasn't dismissive. It was unsure. He looked older. The lines around his mouth no longer carved from anger but from time. I didn't know what I wanted to see in his face. I didn't know what I feared seeing either. After a long pause, he finally spoke. I used to bring you here when you couldn't sleep. His voice was quieter than I remembered, like the tide had worn it down too. You'd ask questions I wasn't ready to answer. I didn't respond. Let the waves fill the space instead. He shifted his stance. I don't know how to stand beside you anymore, but I'm trying. The words sat between us, trembling. I looked out across the water. Fog curled low across the surface like a secret refusing to lift. I haven't forgiven you, I said, keeping my voice even. But I don't hate you anymore. That too was a truth. One I hadn't expected to admit out loud until the moment it passed my lips. He turned then slowly, as if the motion might break something inside him. I told myself you didn't deserve it. The medal. The praise. That you were reckless. That you left us. I didn't flinch. I let him say it. Let him walk through his own ash. I was wrong, he said. I reached into my coat and pulled out a folded paper, crisp edges softened by time but unmarred. I didn't hand it to him like a gift. I placed it between us on the railing. Neutral ground. You buried it once, I said. I carry it now. He picked it up with careful fingers, unfolding the letter like it might shatter. His eyes scanned the lines. His breath hitched. Then he folded it again even more carefully and slipped it inside his coat. We didn't embrace. That wasn't who we were. That might never be. But something shifted. I used to think, he said after a long moment, that watching was a form of control. But maybe it can be reverence. The tide lapped against the posts. The wind moved the fog just enough to reveal the curve of the sun rising over the distant horizon. If you still want to fly, he said, voice breaking slightly, then let me at least be the man who stands below watching. I turned to him. Not with anger. Not with triumph. Just truth. I don't fly to be watched, I said. I fly to live. A wedding hall can turn into a courtroom when truth stands trial. By mid-morning, the Morgan estate was no longer a place for champagne toasts and rose petals. The foyer's flowers had wilted from the humidity of too many bodies and too much unspoken weight. Guests who hadn't intended to return after the ceremony stood clustered around coffee tables holding lukewarm drinks and waiting. Whispers crackled through the air like static. No one said it out loud, but we all felt it. Something was about to be reckoned. The living room had been rearranged hastily, chairs pulled into a wide circle, couches pushed back. It felt more like an intervention than a celebration. Morning light slanted through the tall windows, catching on silver frames that now seemed out of place. The portrait of Edward still hung prominently above the fireplace. But for the first time, no one looked at it. I sat near the edge of the room, Grace by my side, her fingers curled loosely around mine. Liam hovered near the buffet, not eating. Edward stood by the mantel, arms crossed, jaw tight. His eyes avoided mine, but they flicked toward the crowd, measuring, anticipating. The first voice came from Mr. Saul Halverston, one of the town elders, his cane thudding once against the hardwood. "We came here for a wedding," he said. "But some of us saw more than we expected." Murmurs of agreement spread like kindling. We saw a woman save a life in the dark. We saw calm when there was panic. That wasn't the act of a guest, he continued. That was the act of a professional, of someone we've failed to see. I didn't speak. My pulse fluttered in my neck, but I kept my breath steady. Another elder, Mrs. Choi, nodded. Why didn't we know? Why weren't we told? Before Edward could answer. Rachel Sanders stepped forward. She looked older than the last time I'd seen her, lines around her eyes, a strength in her posture that came from years in the ER. She flew rescue into Penobscot County when no one else would, Rachel said. I was on the radio when she pulled a boy off a roof during the winter floods. She has over 60 documented emergency missions. I brought the hospital letters if anyone doubts it. She held up a small binder, nothing dramatic, just pages that proved what had always been true. And suddenly, I wasn't invisible. A slow wave of heads turned not toward Rachel, but toward Edward. He cleared his throat. This isn't the time. It is, someone interrupted. A guest I didn't know well. You raised a daughter who served this town, who risked her life for strangers. And you told no one. His face reddened. He began, voice rough, faltering. I didn't deny her. Liam finally stepped forward, eyes wide. Dad. But Edward's words came in a rush, defensive and brittle. She left. She turned down law school. She embarrassed this family by doing what you couldn't. Grace's voice was quiet but sharp. By becoming more than you expected, his mouth opened, then closed. I rose slowly, reached into my coat and pulled out the folded letter, walked to the center of the room. This, I said, holding it aloft, was addressed to me, but it never arrived. Because he took it. He buried it. I unfolded it carefully and read the first line aloud. Nominee Medal of Distinguished Service, Claire Morgan. Gasps fluttered like birds trapped under the ceiling. I didn't look at Edward. Not yet. The box was in my mother's room. She kept it safe, but even she couldn't fight the silence. I laid the letter on the coffee table. No one moved to touch it. Edward's breathing grew uneven. His eyes landed on the words as if they physically stung. Finally, he stepped forward. His voice cracked. I was afraid she'd outgrow me. And she has. A tyrant doesn't collapse in silence, he crumbles in front of witnesses. The light came slowly, like it had been waiting years to seep through the Morgan estate's tall windows. Rain had finally stopped. The air inside was tight with breath expectation and the heavy silence of too many people watching one man try to hold on to the version of himself that was quickly slipping away. Edward stood at the edge of the rug, face pale, lips drawn thin. The nomination letter lay open on the coffee table like a wound. He didn't look at it. He looked at me. You think a few applause lines and a dusty letter make you better than this family? He snapped, voice cracking louder than he intended. This family doesn't live by chasing storms. There was a beat of stunned stillness. Then someone near the back said clearly, "But she saved us in those storms." The ripple moved through the crowd, not a gasp this time, but a collective awakening. I saw heads nodding, eyes shifting. The mask was slipping, and everyone could see the uneven skin beneath. Grace stood her hand finding Liam's. She didn't speak, but her silence carried weight. Liam stepped forward, chest rising. "You told us to stand tall, Dad, to carry the Morgan name with dignity. But you tried to bury her. You erased her." "I was protecting us," Edward said, though it sounded like a question more than a defense. "From the embarrassment. From the headlines. From—" He gestured vaguely, fingers twitching. "From what Liam's voice didn't rise, but it landed hard. From her being more than you," Edward's jaw twitched. "No," he whispered. "From being forgotten." I tilted my head. My breath caught. He wasn't looking at me anymore. He was staring into the empty middle of the room as if watching a life he never lived. "I built this house," he said softly. "I paid for every wall, every piano lesson, every meal on that damn table. And still, when her name came up in town, people would whisper like she was a legend, like I was the footnote." His fingers clenched at his sides. They praised the daughter who left and forgot the father who stayed. Someone coughed awkwardly in the back. No one else moved. I was afraid, he said louder now, that the world would worship her and forget me. Then he staggered like the weight of the truth had finally sunk through his bones. He backed up 2 steps and dropped into the nearest chair. Not collapsed in defeat, collapsed in revelation. He looked smaller than I had ever seen him. Just a man in a room stripped of all the titles and expectations he had used to armor himself for decades. He blinked at the crowd, then met my eyes. His voice broke. "I didn't know how to be proud of you without feeling erased." I walked to the center of the room, steady. I didn't need the letter now. I didn't need the medal or the stories. He had said the one thing I'd waited 17 years to hear without realizing it. He had admitted I existed. I stood a few feet from him, no higher or lower, no posture of victory. "You don't need the world to worship you, but you do need me to remember you with respect." And you lost that. The storm had passed, but storms leave wreckage, and wreckage must be buried. The sky was clean again, a cool October sun casting silver light over the sea cliffs of Rockport. Wind stirred the brittle grass beneath my boots as I stepped through the old cemetery gate, a glass jar wrapped in cloth tucked under my arm. It held more than paper and ink. It held years of silence. It held words I was never supposed to read. Mother's letter. The medal nomination. The jar clinked faintly with each step, like it too remembered the weight of what it carried. Grace walked beside me, quiet and certain as she always had been when it mattered most. Behind us, Liam trailed, shoulders slightly hunched, his tie loosened, and eyes swollen not from tears, but from everything they'd refused to see until now. There was no ceremony, just 3 of us and a few old family friends who had gathered under the guise of respect for Elaine. I didn't need them to mourn her for me. I had done that already, every day alone. The headstone was simple, weathered. Her name etched in soft granite. Elaine Morgan, 1958-2007. No quote, no epitaph. Just the name of a woman who had loved in silence and been erased by it. I knelt at her grave, brushed aside the damp leaves, and dug carefully with the edge of a small spade. The earth was softer than I remembered, or maybe I had just hardened too much. When the jar was set in place, I didn't speak right away. I let the wind speak for me, let it carry the sound of gulls, the hush of waves crashing on the rocks below. Then I said what I had come to say. "You were right, Mother," I whispered. "Hope is the last thing to fly away," and it flew back to me when I thought I'd buried it beside you. Grace placed a hand on my shoulder, firm and warm. "You've given this family back its truth," she said, her voice barely more than wind. I nodded, blinking against the brightness of the sky. But I can't give it peace. Not all of it. That part wasn't mine to take, and it won't be mine to return. Liam stepped forward, standing beside the grave, his face pale but steady. I should have said something earlier, he began. I should have stood between you and him. But I thought keeping quiet would keep the family whole. You were 10, I said, not looking up. You're not the one who failed. No, he replied, but I let it last too long. His voice broke then, just enough to show the man he was trying to be. You were always my sister Claire, even when he made us pretend you weren't. That did it. The dam I had reinforced for 17 years cracked at the edges. I stood slowly, brushing dirt from my knees, and faced him. I know, I said. And thank you. We stayed there a moment longer, just breathing in the salt, the silence, the clean air left behind after too many storms. Then something shifted in the corner of my eye. Up on the hill, half shaded by a row of pine trees, Edward stood watching. No coat, no umbrella, just him. The same stance he had when I was a child, arms folded, chin high, eyes unreadable. But this time, he wasn't the center of anything. He was on the outside now. He didn't move closer, didn't speak, didn't even nod. And I didn't wave, because some distances were earned. He had built this silence, and now he could sit in it. Recognition is louder than applause. It's silence broken by respect. I stood at the edge of the stage, hands still, heart steady. The banner above read, Sky and Shore Fund Gala, but it might as well have said, 17 years too late. The crowd inside Rockport's Old Town Hall was dressed in every shade of pride and redemption suits, and sea-washed eyes, polite whispers giving way to full-throated cheers. Somewhere beneath the din, I heard the echo of my mother's voice. Hope is the last thing to fly away. Grace and Liam stood near the podium, smiling, not for the camera, not for the guests, but at me. Truly, at me. Grace's hand grazed her stomach, a barely noticeable motion, but I caught it. A new beginning already growing. Life doesn't wait for resolution, I suppose. The ceremony moved in clean beats like waves. A mayor I barely knew offered a commendation. Rachel took the mic after describing one of my late-night rescue flights during a coastal flood. She didn't wait for orders, Rachel said. She followed the scream no one else heard. The crowd clapped politely. Then Grace stepped forward. Because of her, we founded the Sky and Shore Fund to train and support air medical responders across Maine. Her story gave us a mission. Tonight, we honor it. This time, the applause lasted longer. I didn't scan the room for Edward, but I felt him. Far in the back, behind a row of guests, too far to command attention, close enough to hear every word. I didn't know if he'd been invited or if he'd simply appeared, like a ghost that finally realized it couldn't haunt forever. When they called my name, I stepped to the microphone with no prepared speech. Only the truth. The truth I had carried like that glass jar buried in my mother's grave. 17 years ago, I was told to leave. Silence fell, but not the kind I used to dread. This one listened. I was told that flying helicopters to save lives wasn't a path worthy of this family's name. That service was noise. That purpose came only from legacy and tradition. I paused, watching the faces shift from curiosity to guilt to quiet admiration. I looked toward the back of the hall. I saw him. Edward sat with his hands clasped. Not judging, not retreating, just still. As if each word peeled away another layer of armor. When our eyes met, he didn't glare. He didn't blink. He just nodded barely. I flew anyway, I said. Not for medals, not to prove anything. I flew because someone needed me to. I flew because it was the only way I could keep breathing. A long silence followed. Not a cough, not a shuffle, just breath. And tonight, I added, I stand here not in spite of that exile, but because of it. Because the worst thing someone can take from you is not your place at the table. It's your right to believe you deserve to be at one. Applause rose like a tide, but I barely heard it. I only saw Edward lower his head, not in scorn, but surrender. Not because he was beaten, but because for once he had stopped resisting the truth. It wasn't a victory. It wasn't vengeance. It was release. Every single view means a meal for someone in need. Just by watching this video, you're giving warmth, hope, and a full plate to those less fortunate. So watch now, share now, subscribe to the channel, and let's spread love together. The sea looked different from above, smaller, quieter, no longer the storm of my past. The helicopter hummed like a low, sacred prayer. Just me and the sky and the machines I trusted more than most people. The blades sliced dawn into long golden slivers, and Rockport, once a coliseum of judgment and ghosts, lay softened beneath the morning haze. Fog curled along the shoreline like old grief, dissolving into the sun. My boots rested steady on the pedals, fingers poised on the cyclic. The calm wasn't just in the weather, it had finally found me too. Through the headset, dispatch called in a routine coastal scan. No emergencies yet. Good. I didn't want saving to be my only story. Sometimes it was enough to fly with no flames beneath you. I banked right the tail, stabilizing like muscle memory. The town below looked like a painting, rooftops and ribbons of road, the church steeple, the old pier. That pier. I didn't mean to look for it, but I did. Habit, maybe. Or instinct. My phone buzzed once in the side pouch. I didn't check it immediately. Let the world wait for a change. I let the sun catch the windshield, warming the cockpit in amber tones. I let the engine carry me with the kind of trust that didn't demand apologies or explanations. This was mine. Not inherited, not borrowed. Mine. When I finally reached for the phone, the screen lit up with one message. Edward, if you want, meet me at the pier. No past. Just today. There was no signature, no punctuation, no demand. Just a sentence weightless and uncertain as if typed with shaking fingers. I read it once, then again. Then I closed the phone and set it back in the pouch. No rage, no ache, just a quiet, settled breath. Out over the bay, the water shimmered with morning light. The cliffs to the west glowed gold. I wasn't thinking about forgiveness anymore, or legacy, or what I owed to anyone who'd tried to bury me. I wasn't thinking about the times I had to scream to be heard. I was thinking about air. I was thinking about weightlessness, about how silence could mean many things, but today, it meant I wasn't running anymore. I didn't need to land to prove anything. I whispered to myself, barely loud enough to hear over the engine. Hold your altitude. And I did. The helicopter drifted slightly, caught a clean draft, and carried me forward. Down below, the pier came into view. Empty. Or maybe not. I didn't look again. I didn't need to. Behind me, the town slowly shrank. Ahead, the sky was open and sharp and mine. And across the water, the shadow of the aircraft elongated, a single silhouette etched across the sea, flying toward the sun.